June 30th, 1966, Budokan Hall, Tokyo. A man in row 7 stood up during yesterday, holding something that made Paul McCartney stop singing. Write in the comments, where are you listening to this story from? And what time is it right now? The Japanese audience, known for their respectful silence during performances, collectively gasped. This wasn't supposed to happen, not here, not during the Beatles' first Asian tour. The ultra-strict Japanese security, who had rehearsed for 3 weeks, somehow missed him. Paul's voice cracked on the word yesterday and died completely. John instinctively moved toward Paul, his guitar still strapped across his chest. George's fingers slipped off the frets. But Ringo saw everything from his elevated position behind the drums. He saw the man's shaking hands. He saw what was in them. He saw the tears streaming down the stranger's face. The next 7 seconds would become the most controversial moment in Beatles touring history, because what that man was holding wasn't what anyone expected. It was a photograph, black and white, creased from being folded and unfolded countless times. Even from the stage, Paul could see it clearly in the man's trembling hands. A young Japanese woman in a hospital bed, surrounded by medical equipment. The man held it high above his head, like a prayer, like an accusation, like a desperate plea. The Budokan Hall, sacred to Japanese martial arts, fell into a silence so complete you could hear the hum of the amplifiers. The man's name was Hiroaki Yamamoto, 43 years old, a salaryman from Osaka, who'd taken a day off work for the first time in 5 years. He'd paid 3 months' salary for that 7th-row ticket from a scalper outside the venue. The security guards were already moving toward him, hands reaching for their batons, but something in his face stopped them. This wasn't the face of a fanatic or an assassin. This was the face of a father destroyed by grief. "McCartney-san." Hiroaki's voice broke the silence, speaking in heavily accented English that echoed through the hall's perfect acoustics. "My daughter, Yuki, she is dying. 17 years old, leukemia, 3 weeks to live, doctors say. Yesterday was her favorite song. She learned English just to understand your words. She cannot be here. Hospital bed for 6 months now. But she wanted me to ask you something." Paul McCartney, who'd performed for screaming thousands, who'd met the Queen, who'd conquered America, stood frozen on the stage of Budokan Hall. Behind him, John lowered his guitar. George stepped back from his microphone. Ringo slowly, quietly, set down his drumsticks. 10,000 Japanese fans held their breath, waiting to see how the Beatles would respond to this unprecedented breach of concert protocol. But here's what nobody in that audience knew. The Beatles had received death threats before this concert, serious ones. Right-wing Japanese groups had declared the Budokan Hall sacred, not meant for Western rock music. There were protesters outside, with signs reading "Beatles go home." The security briefing that morning had been explicit. Anyone approaching the stage was to be considered a threat. The Tokyo Metropolitan Police had assigned 30 officers just to protect the Beatles, and now, a man had stood up in the middle of their performance, reaching into his jacket. The head of security, Captain Tanaka of the Tokyo Police, had his hand on his weapon. His orders were clear, but he hesitated. Something about the man's posture, the way he held that photograph like it was made of gold, made Tanaka wait. Those 3 seconds of hesitation would change everything. Paul took a step forward on the stage, closer to the edge, closer to Hiroaki. The security detail tensed. Paul's bodyguard, a former British military man named Neil Aspinall, started moving from the wings, but Paul held up his hand. "Wait." He looked at Hiroaki Yamamoto, this stranger who'd interrupted the biggest concert of the Beatles' Asian tour, and asked simply, "What did Yuki want you to ask?" Hiroaki's composure finally broke. Tears ran down his face as he struggled with the English words he'd practiced on the train from Osaka. "She wanted to know if the yesterday in your song ever becomes tomorrow. If the troubles really do seem so far away, because her yesterdays are running out, and she has no tomorrows left. Stop. What Paul McCartney did next has never been reported until now. Paul turned to look at his bandmates. John nodded. George was already unplugging his electric guitar and reaching for an acoustic. Ringo stood up from his kit and walked to the front of the stage. Without a word, without discussion, the Beatles made a decision that would violate their contract, anger their management, and create an international incident. They were going to leave the stage in the middle of their sold-out concert. Paul spoke into the microphone, his voice carrying to every corner of Budokan Hall. Ladies and gentlemen, we need to take an unexpected break. There's something more important than this concert that needs our attention. We'll be back, but right now, 4 lads from Liverpool need to visit a brave girl named Yuki. The audience erupted in confusion. The promoter, Tatsuji Nagashima, rushed on stage, grabbing Paul's arm. You cannot leave. 10,000 people paid. This is contract violation. I will sue. Paul looked at him with an expression that would later be described by witnesses as politely murderous. John Lennon was less polite. Sue us. We don't care. There's a dying girl who needs to hear Yesterday, and we're going to play it for her. George was already walking off stage. Ringo followed. The security detail was in chaos. Were they supposed to stop the Beatles or protect them? Captain Tanaka made a decision that would later cost him a promotion, but earn him something more valuable. Clear a path to the exit. 4-car escort to. He turned to Hiroaki. Which hospital? Tokyo University Hospital, Ward 7, Room 403. But wait, there's a detail that changes everything. As the Beatles prepared to leave, something extraordinary happened in Budokan Hall. The audience, 10,000 Japanese fans who'd paid enormous sums to see the Beatles, began to stand. Not in protest, but in respect. One by one, row by row, they rose to their feet and began to applaud. Not the screaming hysteria of Western audiences, but slow, rhythmic, respectful applause. They understood. In a culture that valued honor and family above all, the Beatles were doing the honorable thing. An elderly woman, in traditional kimono, stood up in the balcony and bowed deeply toward the stage. Others followed. Soon, 10,000 people were bowing to 4 confused British musicians who were violating every rule of professional performance. The photographer from Asahi Shimbun, who captured this moment, would later say it was the most profound image of his career. The Beatles, bowing back to a Japanese audience that was blessing their abandonment of the concert. But not everyone was moved. The British embassy officials present were horrified. This could destroy British-Japanese cultural relations. The Beatles' manager, Brian Epstein, who was in the wings, was calculating the lawsuits in his head. The other British bands hoping to tour Japan watched their chances evaporate. But John Lennon summed up the Beatles' position with characteristic bluntness. There's a 17-year-old girl dying in a hospital who wants to know about tomorrow. Everything else can wait. The motorcade that formed outside Budokan Hall was surreal. 4 police cars, the Beatles' limousine, and spontaneously, dozens of taxis and private cars filled with audience members who wanted to be part of whatever was about to happen. By the time they reached Tokyo University Hospital, over 100 vehicles were following. The hospital administration, receiving a call that the Beatles were coming, thought it was a prank, until they looked out the window and saw the circus arriving. Here's what the hospital staff witnessed, but never reported. Ward 7 was the cancer ward, the youngest patients, the ones with the least hope. As the Beatles walked through, still in their matching stage suits, they passed rooms full of dying children. John, whose mother had died when he was 17, almost turned back, but Paul grabbed his arm. We're here now. We finished this. Room 403 was at the end of the corridor. Through the small window, they could see her, Yuki Yamamoto, 17 years old, down to perhaps 70 pounds, bald from chemotherapy, connected to machines that were keeping her alive. She was asleep. Her father Hiroaki, who'd somehow arrived before them, was sitting beside her bed, holding her hand. Paul knocked gently. Hiroaki looked up, his face a mixture of disbelief and gratitude. He whispered something in Japanese to his daughter. Yuki's eyes opened slowly, focusing with difficulty. When she saw the Beatles standing in her doorway, Paul, John, George, and Ringo, looking exactly like the posters on her wall, her heart monitor spiked so dramatically that a nurse came running. "It's all right," Paul said softly, entering the room. "We're just here to play a song for a friend." "You're not prepared for what happened in that hospital room." George had brought an acoustic guitar from the car. Paul sat on the edge of Yuki's bed, careful not to disturb the medical equipment. John stood at the foot of the bed, uncharacteristically quiet. Ringo found a medical supply box to sit on, using his hands as drums, and in that small sterile room that smelled of disinfectant and death, the Beatles played Yesterday. But this wasn't the polished version from the album or the rehearsed version from their concerts. This was raw, intimate, Paul's voice cracking with emotion as he sang directly to Yuki. When he reached the line, "I believe in yesterday," Yuki's lips moved, mouthing the words in perfect English. She'd memorized every syllable, every pause, every breath. When the song ended, the room was silent, except for the mechanical breathing of life support machines. Then Yuki spoke, her voice barely a whisper but clear. "Tomorrow, there is no tomorrow for me. But now I understand. Yesterday isn't about the past. It's about the moments that matter. This moment, this is my yesterday, that someone will remember tomorrow." John Lennon, who never cried in public, who prided himself on his tough Liverpool exterior, turned away as tears ran down his face. George set down his guitar and took Yuki's other hand. Ringo stood up and walked to the window, unable to watch. But Paul stayed on the bed, looking into the eyes of a dying girl who'd found meaning in his words. "Would you like to hear another song?" Paul asked. Yuki nodded. "Please, let it be." Paul looked confused. "We haven't recorded that yet. I've only just started writing it. This is the detail that will give you chills." Yuki smiled, an expression that transformed her gaunt face. "I know, but you will. In 1970, it will help many people through dark times. My English teacher, she is psychic, she told me, she said the Beatles would visit me, and you would sing a song that doesn't exist yet." The Beatles exchanged glances. This was impossible. Let It Be was just fragments in Paul's notebook, inspired by a dream about his mother. He'd mentioned it to no one, not even John. Yet this dying girl in Tokyo was asking for it by name. "I don't know all the words yet," Paul said carefully. "Then sing what you know. The words will come." And so, in room 403 of Tokyo University Hospital, Paul McCartney performed Let It Be for the first time ever, making up verses as he went, with John humming harmony, George playing chords he'd never heard before, and Ringo keeping time on a medical supply box. The song that would become one of the Beatles' most beloved tracks was born in a cancer ward, sung to a 17-year-old girl who somehow knew it was coming. Nurses gathered in the doorway. Other patients, those who could walk, appeared in the corridor. Someone was crying, multiple someones. The head of the hospital, Dr. Sato, who'd initially tried to bar the Beatles' entry for disrupting his facility, stood transfixed. Later he would say, "I've seen death many times, but I've never seen it transformed into something beautiful, until that moment." But the most incredible part was yet to come. As Paul finished the improvised version of Let It Be, Yuki's father Hiroaki pulled out something else from his bag. It was a canvas, small, maybe 12 inches square. On it was a painting, abstract, swirls of color that seemed to move, to pulse with life. "Yuki painted this," he said, "before she got sick. She was going to art school. She called it tomorrow's yesterday. She wanted you to have it. George took the painting, studying it. There was something hypnotic about it. The way the colors seemed to shift in the fluorescent hospital light. It's beautiful, he said. It looks like music, like how music would look if you could see it. Yuki managed a laugh. Weak but genuine. That's what I was painting. Yesterday, I was painting the song. John moved closer to look. In the swirls of paint, he could almost see it. The melody made visual, the emotion of the song, captured in color and form. You're an artist, he said simply. A real artist, like our friend Stuart was. The mention of Stuart Sutcliffe, the Beatles' deceased fifth member and artist friend, hung in the air. Paul reached into his pocket and pulled out something none of the others had seen him carry. A guitar pick that had belonged to Stuart. He pressed it into Yuki's palm. This belonged to a friend who died too young. Another artist. Keep it. Maybe wherever you're going you'll meet him. Stop. This next part has been kept secret for over 50 years. Yuki closed her eyes, clutching the guitar pick. When she opened them again, she looked directly at John. Your mother, Julia. She says she's proud of you. She says the music you'll write about her will help people understand that love doesn't end with death. John stepped backward like he'd been slapped. Julia, his mother, had died in 1958, hit by a car. He'd never gotten to say goodbye. He'd certainly never mentioned her in any interview, never told anyone except his closest friends about the pain that still consumed him. How could you know about her? I told you, Yuki said softly. My teacher, she sees things. She saw you coming here. She saw your mother standing behind you. She's here now, she says, watching you choose kindness over fame. The room felt suddenly electric, charged with something beyond understanding. George, always the most spiritual of the Beatles, said later that he felt presences in that room, not just the living, but others, watching, approving. Paul felt it too, a warmth that had nothing to do with the crowded space. Dr. Sato stepped forward. I'm sorry, but Yuki needs to rest. The excitement, but Yuki shook her head. No, please. One more song. Together, all of us. She meant everyone. The Beatles, her father, the nurses, the patients who'd gathered, and she had a specific request. Love Me Do. Their first hit. The song that started everything. What happened next turned a hospital room into something magical. Paul started it. Just the harmonica part he'd played hundreds of times. But then Yuki's voice joined in. Weak but pure. Her father, who'd claimed he didn't speak English, knew every word. The nurses, formally trained in English, sang along. The other patients, some wheeling IV drips, others on crutches, all joined in. John played his guitar. George harmonized. Ringo used everything he could find for percussion. The song echoed through Ward 7, through the hospital, out into the parking lot, where hundreds of fans who'd followed from Budokan Hall heard it and joined in. Love Me Do, a simple pop song written by teenage boys in Liverpool, became a prayer, a celebration, a goodbye, and a hello, all at once. The security guards sang, the British embassy officials sang, even Captain Tanaka, who'd nearly arrested Hiroaki at the concert, found himself humming along. When it ended, Yuki was crying, but smiling. Thank you, she whispered. Now I have a tomorrow. Every time someone plays your music after I'm gone, I'll have another tomorrow. The Beatles stayed for another hour, until Dr. Sato absolutely insisted they leave for Yuki's health. They signed autographs for every patient in the ward. John drew pictures for the children. George taught some basic guitar chords to a boy with one arm. Ringo let kids play with his rings. Paul sat with families and listened to their stories, translating their love for the Beatles' music into something more than fandom, into human connection. As they prepared to leave, Yuki called Paul back one more time. She whispered something in his ear. something the others couldn't hear. Paul nodded, tears streaming down his face, and kissed her forehead. He never told anyone what she said, not even the other Beatles. He took that secret to his grave. The journey back to Budokan Hall revealed something extraordinary. The concert venue should have been empty. It had been 3 hours since the Beatles walked off stage. Refunds should have been processed, lawsuits filed, careers ended. But when their motorcade arrived, they found something unprecedented. The entire audience was still there. 10,000 people had waited in their seats for 3 hours, in complete silence, for the Beatles to return. Tatsuji Nagashima, the promoter who'd threatened to sue, met them at the stage door. His face was streaked with tears. "My own daughter died of leukemia 5 years ago. She was 15. I understand now. Please, finish the concert, not for the contract, for them." He gestured to the waiting audience. "They want to be part of this story." The Beatles walked back on stage to an ovation that lasted 10 minutes. Not screaming, not hysteria, but deep, profound appreciation. Paul took the microphone. "We're sorry we left, but we're not sorry for why we left. Music means nothing if it doesn't serve humanity. Tonight we met a girl named Yuki, who reminded us why we play music. She's dying, but she's more alive than anyone we've ever met. This concert is for her." They played for another hour. Every song infused with new meaning. "Yesterday" became a hymn. "Help" became a prayer. "All My Loving" became a promise. The audience swayed, in perfect unison. 10,000 strangers, united by witnessing something larger than entertainment. They'd witnessed love in action. But here's what nobody knew until decades later. 3 weeks later, Yuki Yamamoto died. It was peaceful, her father reported. She was holding Stewart's guitar pick and humming Let It Be. Her last words were, "Tell the Beatles, I can see tomorrow now. It's beautiful." Her funeral was attended by over 1,000 people, most of them strangers who'd heard about the hospital visit. The Beatles, who were in Manila by then, sent flowers and a telegram that read, "Yesterday has become forever. Love, John, Paul, George and Ringo." But the story doesn't end there. Yuki's painting, Tomorrow's Yesterday, traveled with the Beatles for the rest of their touring days. It was in the studio when they recorded Let It Be properly in 1970. Paul later admitted that the finished lyrics were influenced by what Yuki had said, though he never revealed exactly how. The painting now hangs in Paul's home studio, and he said in interviews that he looks at it whenever he's struggling with a song. The psychic teacher Yuki had mentioned was real. Her name was Michiko Tanaka, no relation to the captain, and she taught English at Yuki's high school. In 1975, she published a book about her experiences, including her prediction about the Beatles' visit. She claimed she'd seen it in a dream 3 months before it happened, down to the exact date and the songs they would play. Skeptics dismissed her, but those who were in room 403 that day knew better. John Lennon, in his famous 1970 Rolling Stone interview, was asked about the Tokyo incident. "It taught us that music is a responsibility," he said. "Every song we write enters people's lives at crucial moments. Yuki was dying, and she needed yesterday to mean something, so we made it mean something. That's our job, not to be pop stars, but to be there when people need us." The revelation that will change how you see the Beatles. In 1980, just months before his death, John was in his New York apartment when he received a package from Japan. Inside was a letter from Hiroaki Yamamoto and a photograph. The letter explained that after Yuki's death, he'd discovered she'd kept a diary. In it she'd written about the Beatles' visit in detail, including something she'd never told them. "I'm not really psychic, neither is my teacher, but I needed them to believe in something magical. Because that's what their music is, magic. I knew about Let It Be, because Paul had been humming it in an interview I'd watched 100 times. I knew about John's mother from a biography. I knew about Stuart from research. But I needed them to believe that some things transcend death. Because I need to believe that too. When I'm gone, I want to believe the music continues. That love continues. That yesterday becomes tomorrow, becomes forever. John reportedly sat in silence for hours after reading this. Then he went to his piano and played Yesterday, Let It Be, and a new song he'd been working on, Watching the Wheels. His assistant said she'd never seen him cry so hard. George Harrison, who'd always been moved by the spiritual aspect of the event, went to Tokyo in 1985 to visit Yuki's grave. He played Yesterday on his guitar and left flowers. A photographer captured him there, kneeling in prayer, but George had the photos destroyed. Some moments, he said, are too sacred for the public. Ringo, in a 2010 interview, said simply, "That night in Tokyo changed us. We went in as a band doing a tour. We came out understanding that we had a purpose beyond money and fame. Every time I play drums now, I think of playing on that medical supply box while a dying girl smiled." Paul McCartney has never revealed what Yuki whispered to him. In 2020, when asked again, he said, "Some words are meant for just two people. But I will say this, what she told me influenced every song I've written since. She gave me permission to write about hope, even when there is none. To write about tomorrow, even when it won't come. To write about love, even when it ends." The final truth that nobody talks about. The Budokan Hall concert of June 30th, 1966, is officially recorded as the Beatles' most successful Japanese performance. What's not recorded is that it almost didn't happen. The death threats were real. The security concerns were real. The Beatles were terrified. They'd considered canceling. But that morning, Paul had a dream. In it, a young Japanese girl was painting a picture of yesterday while dying in a hospital bed. When he woke up, he told the others they had to perform. "Something important is going to happen tonight," he said. "I don't know what, but we need to be there." Some call it coincidence. Some call it destiny. Some call it the universe arranging itself around music that needed to exist. But everyone who was there, in Budokan Hall, in the hospital, in that room, 403, knows the truth. They witnessed the night. The Beatles proved that music isn't just entertainment, it's medicine, it's prayer. It's a bridge between yesterday and tomorrow, between life and death, between four boys from Liverpool and a dying girl in Tokyo who needed to know that love and beauty transcend everything, even the end. The Beatles played over 1,400 concerts. They conquered the world, defined a generation, and changed music forever. But if you ask Paul McCartney about his proudest moment, he won't mention Ed Sullivan, or Shea Stadium, or the Royal Variety performance. He'll pause, his eyes distant, and say, "There was this girl named Yuki in Tokyo. We played yesterday for her in a hospital room. She died 3 weeks later, but for one moment, we gave her tomorrow. That's the only success that ever mattered." That's the story of the night. The Beatles walked off stage in the middle of a concert to visit a dying fan. The night they chose humanity over contract obligations. The night 10,000 Japanese fans waited in silence for 3 hours and witnessed something holy when they returned. The night music became medicine, yesterday became tomorrow, and 4 musicians discovered their true purpose. The music continues. The legend grows. But in a cemetery in Tokyo, there's a gravestone that reads, Yuki Yamamoto, 1949 to 1966, painter of yesterday, dreamer of tomorrow. Fresh flowers appear there every week. Nobody knows who leaves them, but they're always accompanied by a guitar pick, a reminder that some concerts never really end, they just become part of forever.